Natalie Cruz stood in the corridor of her unit barracks, fingers trembling as she held the envelope in her hand. The return address read, U.S. Army Advanced Marksmanship, Unit Selection Board. It should have been the first step toward everything she'd worked for. Her hands were calloused from years of handling a rifle. Her nights had been consumed with tactical manuals and scope calibration charts. She had waited for this moment her entire military career. But when she opened the letter, the world fell. Quiet. We regret to inform you that your application to the United States Army Sniper School has not been accepted at this time. Please see attached notes for further information. There were no typos, no misunderstandings. She read it twice. 3 times. The words remained the same. A short paragraph was all it took to end a dream. Natalie didn't cry, not immediately. She walked slowly to her bunk and sat down, pressing the letter flat against her knee. She stared at it as if sheer willpower could rewrite the ink. Around her, her fellow soldiers were preparing for lights-out laughter, shouts, the usual teasing. That filled the barracks every night. None of them knew that something in Natalie had just cracked. The official reason listed in the notes felt like a slap, hesitation under simulated stress. She remembered the simulation. It had been the final phase of her evaluation. A hostage scenario, built with sound effects, pop-up targets, and live role players. She had hesitated for exactly 1.7 seconds before taking the shot. She'd reviewed her own helmet cam footage after the test. It had been a calculated pause confirming the angle, wind, background movement. It wasn't fear. It was control. Apparently, it wasn't enough. Natalie had always believed the rifle was the great equalizer. It didn't care about gender, background, or rank. It only cared whether you could shoot, and whether you could shoot under pressure. And she could. But now, the institution that built that philosophy had deemed her unworthy of the title sniper. A week later, the reassignment orders came. Natalie was being sent to Eastern Europe, to a remote NATO-aligned base near the Polish border. The posting was quiet, unglamorous, and well beneath her capabilities. Her new job, range safety officer. She'd be in charge of logging bullet counts, verifying safety procedures, and maintaining order on a live-fire training site. It felt like a punishment disguised as duty. Some of her unit tried to comfort her before she left. Staff Sergeant Elkins offered a pat on the back and said, "They made a mistake, Cruz. You're the best shot in this unit." But words didn't change the fact. She had been rejected. And no one above her seemed to care. Natalie didn't say goodbye to most people. She packed her gear, took one final look at the training range where she had once bested even the instructors, and boarded the transport bus in silence. As the landscape blurred past her window, she replayed everything in her head, the moments. She could have done differently, the ways she might have impressed the panel more. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about hesitation. There were whispers after all. Some quietly said the sniper program remained old school. That women had to be flawless to be considered equal. Natalie had never wanted favors. But she couldn't deny that others with worse scores had been accepted. When she arrived at the windswept, steel-gray compound in Poland, the snow was falling lightly. A corporal showed her to her quarters, gave her a schedule, and didn't ask any questions. This was a place for order and silence. Natalie unpacked, set her rifle on the rack, and placed the rejection letter in a folder beneath her pillow. She told herself she'd move on, do her duty, stay professional. But in the back of her mind, one thing remained clear. She hadn't missed the shot. The system had missed her. And someday, somehow, she'd make sure they realized it. The air in Poland was always colder than Natalie expected. Mornings bit at the skin even through her uniform, and the winds across the open range had a way of getting into her bones. She wore it like armor. Routine became her shield. Her new title, Range Safety Officer, sounded important, but in practice, it was mostly logistics. She managed live fire drills, logged ammunition counts, and enforced regulations with the discipline of someone still nursing a wounded pride. Every time she watched a trainee step up to the line, adjusting their scope with fumbling hands, she had to bite down the urge to correct them. She wasn't allowed to coach. She was supposed to supervise. Natalie followed orders. She tracked wind patterns, marked impacts on targets, and noted mistakes silently. But even in silence, she saw things others missed. Her eyes remained sharp. She noticed how Private Jensen always pulled to the left on his second shot. She saw how Sergeant Bell's stance leaned too far forward under pressure. She kept her observations to herself. First, then something changed. One cold afternoon, a recruit named Kowalski failed 3 rounds in a row. His frustration boiled over, and after the range went cold, Natalie approached him. She didn't correct him. She just asked a question. "Do you account for that tower?" She said, pointing at a tall Combs massed behind the target zone. Kowalski blinked. "What about it?" "It disrupts the crosswind just enough to throw off your zero, especially with your barrel length." He stared at her like she'd spoken another language. But the next day, he adjusted his position slightly and scored his first qualifying round. Word started to spread. More soldiers began seeking her out after grills, quietly, a few at a time. Some just asked what she thought of their grouping. Others handed her their logs without saying a word, hoping she'd make a note. Natalie never advertised her help, but she didn't turn them away either. Soon, her private notebook, once filled with rejection and weather readings, was full of small coaching tips. Adjustments in posture, notes on barrel harmonics, corrections no one else had taken time to notice. But not everyone appreciated it. An older range instructor, Chief Warrant Officer Kramer, caught wind of her growing influence and called her out. During a staff meeting, "You're not here to teach, Cruz," he said sharply. "You're here to observe. Let instructors do their jobs." Natalie didn't argue. She simply nodded and closed her notebook. But that night, when a corporal from the French detachment scored a perfect set after following her earlier suggestions, she smiled quietly. She didn't need credit. Results were enough. Still, being stuck behind the scenes weighed on her. Every time she watched a soldier squeeze off a shot, she imagined how she would have taken it differently, calmer, cleaner. And every time someone missed, a part of her wanted to take the rifle herself, show them how it was done. But she didn't, until one afternoon changed everything. A senior colonel arrived on base for an unscheduled tour. Word spread fast. No one knew why he was there, only that the visit came directly from NATO Command. Base operations scrambled to tidy things up. Commanders barked orders. Soldiers polished boots that hadn't seen care in weeks. Natalie didn't think much of it until the colonel walked through the range. He paused at her table, glanced over her meticulous notes, and said nothing. Just gave her a nod before moving on. She thought that would be the end of it. But 2 days later, her name appeared on the range roster for a VIP demonstration detail. She wasn't just logging rounds. She'd be coordinating safety for a live fire showcase. Something about it felt off. Still, Natalie reported in early, checked every detail, ran wind measurements 3 times. Everything had to be perfect. That's when she saw the contractor. Civilian, clean uniform, no name tag, carrying a black case he hadn't declared. She frowned. Her instincts, the ones she had been trained to suppress, came roaring back. Something didn't feel right. She wrote a quick note and submitted it to the commanding officer. It was dismissed within minutes. "Relax, Cruz. He's cleared. Focus on your job." So she did, but not the job they expected her to. and NATO base buzzed with tension. The air felt heavier, not just because of the weather, but because something about this visit was different. No one had expected a general to arrive, especially not Lieutenant General Adrian Keller, the sharp-toned strategist who'd led high-stakes operations in 3 countries and survived 2 assassination attempts. His presence meant only one thing. Something big was happening behind closed doors. Natalie noticed it right away. The drill schedules changed. Access to several buildings was restricted without explanation. Even the mess hall menu was upgraded. It wasn't just brass showing up, it was brass with bodyguards. Then came the assignment. Natalie was to coordinate safety procedures for the sniper range during the general's tour. It was a public-facing event, part demonstration, part morale building. Several top-performing soldiers from different units were selected to show off NATO's joint training. Journalists weren't allowed, but a few internal media teams were setting up cameras. Natalie didn't complain. She simply got to work. She ran wind readings 3 times that morning. She recalibrated the environmental sensors herself. She even walked the target line to double-check the terrain. Everything had to be perfect. While checking the final setup, Natalie spotted someone unfamiliar near the observation platform. A civilian contractor with a NATO access badge, dressed a bit too sharply for a field exercise. He wore a black jacket zipped all the way up and carried a slim, hard-shell case. Natalie approached him. "You're not on the clearance list for this side of the range." The man smiled politely. "I'm part of General Keller's security. Detail, private contractor. We're doing an auxiliary comms check." He flashed an ID badge. It looked valid, clearance seal, embedded chip, the works. But something still didn't feel right. His boots were too clean. No dust, no gravel scuffs. He hadn't walked here from base headquarters. And his case was too large for a simple comms unit. Natalie made note of it. Back at the command post, she quietly submitted a written report flagging the civilian as a possible anomaly. The duty officer barely looked at it before waving her off. "He's been cleared by command. Some of these contractors come with higher clearance than ours. Don't worry about it, Cruz. Just manage your perimeter." That didn't sit right. Natalie took her own precautions. She unlocked one of the training rifles, an M110 DMR, that had just been cleaned and reassembled, and quietly stashed it in the rear of the tower she'd be overseeing. It was a move that walked the line of insubordination. But instinct beat protocol. By the time the general's convoy arrived, the base was staged like a performance. Troops stood at attention. Cameras rolled. Speeches were given, and every step General Keller took was shadowed by aides and private security. The general himself was sharp-eyed and alert, surveying the range as if scanning for weakness. Natalie watched everything. The demonstration began. A mixed unit of French, German, and American soldiers took turns on the range. Long-distance targets, moving silhouettes, even thermal pop-ups. It was all meant to impress. But Natalie wasn't watching the shooters. She was watching the man. Near the tower, the contractor moved strangely. He wasn't focused on communications equipment or security coordination. He was focused on the general tracking his movements, adjusting his stance, his hand brushing the zipper of his jacket. Then she saw it, a flash of metal. Something tucked just inside his coat. Natalie's stomach dropped. Her pulse quickened. She scanned the tower where her emergency rifle was hidden. Her hands at CHED. She spoke into her radio. "This is Cruz on range control. I need a recheck on the contractor by the comms post. Suspected concealed object. Possible unauthorized weapon." The reply came after a delay. "Negative, Cruz. Do not raise an alert. Stand down and continue supervision." Natalie looked back. A man was now slowly unzipping his jacket, revealing something long, metallic, and shaped far too much like a detonator trigger. She didn't hesitate. She bolted to the tower. Asterisk. Natalie Cruz sprinted up the wooden steps of the range tower 2 at a time, her boots barely touching each tread. Her heart pounded with focused urgency, not fear, not panic, just raw calculation. She knew she had seconds, maybe less. Below, the general had paused mid-conversation, turning slightly to acknowledge a question from one of the NATO officers. A camera drone buzzed in the air, catching every angle. Soldiers lined up along the range, unaware of the man standing off to the side, hands now fully beneath his jacket. Eyes locked on the VIP. Natalie reached the top of the tower, flung open the emergency locker, and pulled out the M110 she had prepped hours earlier. It was already zeroed. She'd made sure of it. Her fingers moved from memory. Bolt back, chambered, safety off. She dropped flat against the cold platform, sighted downrange, and found her mark through the scope. The contractor was no longer trying to blend in. He stepped forward, pulling something black and metallic from beneath his coat. Her crosshairs centered on his sternum. She adjusted slightly, exhaled. Half a second of perfect stillness, and then she fired. The crack of the rifle silenced everything. Soldiers ducked. Security detail reached for their sidearms. General Keller's guards moved in a protective wedge around him, shouting commands. Chaos erupted in less than a breath. The contractor no. The assassin collapsed where he stood, the object in his hand skittering across the gravel. A second later, a high-pitched electronic whine gave out before the device blinked red and powered down. Dead man switch. Natalie had struck just in time. From the tower, she stayed locked on her scope, heart steady, breathing calm. Only once the general was moved behind cover did she flick the safety back on and lower the rifle. Voices were now yelling over comms. Soldiers ran in all directions. But she didn't move because she knew what came next. Within 2 minutes, MPs stormed the tower. She raised her hands without resistance. Put the weapon down. It's safe, she said calmly, backing away from the rifle. Target was carrying an unregistered device. Check it now before it resets. The MPs were torn between restraining her and verifying what she just said. It was only when a counterintel officer confirmed the object was a remote-triggered explosive, rigged with a pressure sensor, that the mood shifted. Natalie was escorted down, but not in cuffs. Her weapon was bagged, and the body of the shooter was already being scanned and processed by NATO specialists. No ID, no insignia, just a deep scar across his left jaw and a serial-less pistol tucked into his belt. General Keller hadn't spoken yet. He was whisked into a secured vehicle while debriefs were launched across the base. But word spread like wildfire. The range safety officer had just taken a shot no one else saw coming. An hour later, Natalie sat alone in the debriefing room. Her fingers still tingled from the recoil, but her mind remained sharp. She had written her after-action report within minutes. Every step, every decision documented cleanly, without drama. The door opened. It wasn't her CO who stepped in. It was General Keller. He walked in without a word, holding her report. He was taller than she expected in person, his voice calm, but gravelly. You were supposed to stand down, he said. I saw the threat, Natalie replied, meeting his gaze. You disobeyed protocol, violated security chain of command, took a shot without clearance. She nodded once, and saved your life. He didn't flinch. He studied her, weighing the moment. You ever try out for sniper school? Her jaw tensed. Rejected. 3 months ago. The general exhaled through his nose. Then whoever signed that letter needs to be fired. He dropped her report on the table and turned to leave. Be ready in 48 hours, he said. You're going to Germany. There's someone there I want you to meet. Natalie blinked. Germany? Keller paused at the door. The NATO Advanced Marksman Division. You've got their attention now. 2 days later, Natalie Cruz stepped off the tarmac at the NATO Marksman Division in Grafenwöhr, Germany, a sprawling training facility buried deep within pine forests and shielded by layers of bureaucracy. Unlike the bases she was used to, this one didn't advertise its purpose. No signs, no fanfare, just watchful eyes and silent guards. She was met by a lieutenant in plain fatigues, who said nothing as he led her to a black SUV. The windows were tinted. The ride was silent. The compound they pulled into wasn't listed on any standard NATO map. It had no base insignia, just a reinforced hangar surrounded by a double fence and motion sensor towers. The badge she'd been given at the gate didn't work at any door. She had to be buzzed in manually, escorted every step of the way. Natalie had been in the military long enough to know the signs. This was a black site, used for off-record operations, training, and talent assessments that didn't fit within normal parameters. She wasn't being invited. She was being evaluated. Her escort finally brought her to an underground corridor that led into a large observation chamber. Inside, a shooting range extended nearly 1,000 meters across, with dynamic terrain, urban mock-ups, smoke generators, and targets that moved erratically. Waiting at the far end of the room was a tall man with iron gray hair and a limp that didn't slow his movement. He wore no rank on his collar. "This, sir?" he asked. The lieutenant nodded and left without a word. The man turned to Natalie, studying her with the scrutiny of someone used to disappointment. "I'm Director Rausch. NATO doesn't train assassins. We train problem solvers with rifles. And we don't hand out second chances lightly. You want this seat? Prove you deserve it." Natalie didn't blink. "What's the task?" He smiled faintly and gestured toward the range. "You'll find out." She spent the next 3 hours under brutal testing. It wasn't just shooting. It was physics problems mid-drill, live. Drone interference, night vision under strobe conditions. In one scenario, she had to identify a hostage through 2 layers of glass. Wind drift and environmental heat distortion, all under time pressure. It wasn't training. It was trial by fire. And she thrived in it. By the end of the second day, Natalie's scores were in the top 5% of any recruit ever tested at the Shadow Range. Director Rausch didn't compliment her. He simply handed her a file with the words Tier 0 clearance, temporary, stamped across the front. "This doesn't mean you're in," he said. "It means we're watching." The file contained dossiers, not of missions, but of people. One name stood out: Lt. Gen. Adrian Keller, the man whose life she had saved. Another file had no photo, just a Cody name: Räikkönen. Natalie skimmed the contents, then looked up. "Who is this?" Rausch replied, "The man you shot in Poland was one of his operatives. A rogue cell. Has been targeting NATO generals involved in restructuring regional commands. Keller was target number 3. 2 others weren't as lucky." A cold chill passed through her. "You're saying this wasn't a one-off?" Rausch nodded. "We believe Räikkönen is building a kill list. Every general or commander involved in tightening drone regulation, autonomous systems, and classified war simulations. He's not a terrorist. He's an insider, one we trained once." Natalie leaned back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. She had stopped 1 strike, but the game was far from over. "You want me to find him?" she asked. Rausch didn't smile. "No, we want you to be ready when he finds you." For the first time in years, Natalie felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since sniper school. Purpose. Asterisk. The assignment came quietly. No briefing room. No overhead slides. No names. Just a folded slip placed inside Natalie's locker during a midnight training rotation. Written in tight, secure handwriting. "You're being watched. Move 3 steps ahead, or you'll fall two behind. Attached was a burner phone. No contacts. One unread message. Prague. Warehouse District. 0200 hours. They'll be there. Natalie didn't ask who sent it. Not out loud. The shadow range wasn't built on questions. It was built on intuition and reaction. The moment she opened the note, she knew her test wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. That night, she was on a NATO transport headed toward the Czech Republic under a fake logistics manifest. No badge. No rifle. Just a suppressed sidearm, an encrypted sat phone, and a single directive. Observe. Do not engage unless forced. By 2:06 a.m. She was in place. The warehouse district was mostly dark, a grid of crumbling concrete and rusted catwalks. From her position on a rooftop overlooking the courtyard, Natalie watched two black SUVs pull up under a busted sodium street lamp. 4 figures emerged, 2 tall, 1 short, 1 limping. The limp made her tense. She reached for her scope, which had been custom-rigged to mount to a civilian DSLR shell. From 300 meters, the grainy silhouette of the limping man came into focus. It wasn't General Keller. But the posture, the swagger, was eerily familiar. She snapped photos, switching between infrared and low-light capture. Then her scope caught something else. A second team. Rooftop, across from her, hidden in shadow. A spotter. And a shooter. They weren't watching the meeting. They were watching her. Natalie didn't move. She adjusted her breath and shifted her reflection in a puddle near her boot. The sniper hadn't engaged yet. That meant he wasn't sure either. They were testing her again. Or this was something worse. She slipped her phone from her jacket and keyed the sat phone's silent panic signal. Triple press on the backplate. A green light blinked once. NATO command. Would have her GPS. Backup would arrive. Maybe not in time. The rooftop sniper's scope glinted for just a second. That was all she needed. Natalie dropped flat behind the vent shaft and rolled hard to the left. A suppressed crack echoed from the opposite rooftop. A bullet sliced through the air where her head had just been. Clean. Professional. She drew her sidearm. But at this range it wouldn't matter. She had to close the distance or disappear. Her brain calculated wind angles, cover, and fallback paths in seconds. She lobbed a small flash charge disguised as a camera battery off the edge of the roof. It exploded in a burst of blinding magnesium light. By the time the sniper team recovered, she was already scaling down a drainpipe and vanishing into the shadows. Natalie sprinted low through the alleyways, using puddles and reflections to track rooftop movement. The SUV meeting had scattered. The limp-walking man had vanished. No license plates. No faces caught, except for one. As she turned down a side corridor, her path was suddenly blocked. A man stood there, no rifle, no mask. Just a calm, lean figure in a dark turtleneck. Eyes like flint, unshaken by the chaos. He spoke with a faint Finnish accent. "I've heard about you." Natalie didn't respond. He nodded at her sidearm. "If you were going to shoot, you would have already. That means you want to know what this is." She kept her aim steady. "Reikanen," he smirked. "Names are for files. I'm just a correction." Then he turned his back on her. Natalie's instinct screamed. No one turned their back in a standoff. She fired. But by the time the bullet hit the wall, Reikanen was gone, disappeared into the steam rising from the nearby heating ducts like a phantom. Natalie stood alone in the alleyway, heart hammering. She had just looked into the eyes of the man responsible for orchestrating high-level assassinations across NATO, and he had let her love. For now. Natalie didn't sleep after Prague. The flight back to Germany was silent, her thoughts louder than the engine hum. She'd come within a triggered pull of stopping Reikanen, the ghost who had outplayed NATO for nearly a year. And yet, He had turned his back on her, deliberately, mockingly. That wasn't mercy. That was a message. When she landed at the Grafenwehr facility, Director Rausch was waiting. "I got your field report," he said flatly, "and the GPS flag." Natalie stepped off the ramp and locked eyes with him. He was there, in person. Rausch stiffened. "Räikkönen?" She nodded. "And he knew who I was. Knew I was coming." He wasn't surprised. He was expecting me. For a moment, Rausch said nothing. Then he motioned her toward the operations wing, speaking in a lower tone. "There's something I didn't include in your initial briefing." Natalie followed him down a side corridor, one that required biometric access, and a key code changed every 12 hours. The hallway led to a secured vault lined with hardened terminals and air-gapped databases. Inside, Rausch brought up a file on a classified drive, one Natalie had never seen before. It was a dossier. Not on Räikkönen, on General Adrian Keller. Natalie scanned the documents rapidly. Photographs, flight logs, financial statements. A series of encrypted transactions routed through military contractors, shadow nonprofits, and foreign shell corporations. Patterns emerged, deliberate, careful, but clear. She turned toward Rausch slowly. "What am I looking at?" He didn't blink. A man playing both sides. Natalie's voice was low, hard. "That's not possible." "I saved him?" "I watched someone try to kill him." Rausch nodded. "Yes, and we believe that was real. But sometimes traitors make enemies on both sides." Räikkönen and Keller were once part of the same Project Spectre protocol, an elite AI-driven targeting system developed to eliminate high-value threats autonomously. It was shelved. Too dangerous. Natalie clenched her fists. So what happened? Keller wanted to revive it. Räikkönen wanted to destroy it. Their alliance splintered. One turned rogue. The other turned ambitious. And now we're caught in the middle. She stared at the screen. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Rausch was blunt. "Because you wouldn't have trusted us. And because Keller still has power. Until we know how deep his influence goes, we have to play along." Natalie's breath caught in her chest. She remembered Keller's words. Be ready in 48 hours. Had he known she'd be dragged into this war? Suddenly, the overhead alarm buzzed. Red lights spun in the corners. A base-wide security breach warning echoed through the intercom. Unauthorized data extraction in progress. Level 3 terminal breach. All personnel secure data points immediately. Rausch grabbed the terminal and punched in commands. Someone's downloading the Spectre protocol files from inside this facility. Natalie's heart pounded. Can you trace it? Already? Working on it. The screen flickered, showing camera feeds from the lower archives. A figure in uniform sprinted past one of the lens's tall, confident stride. Security badge clipped sideways to avoid being scanned. Natalie recognized the posture instantly. "That's Commander Voss," she whispered. "He ran field logistics during the Keller incident in Poland." Rausch's voice turned sharp. "Then Keller's still pulling strings. Voss must be exfiltrating the data, handing it off." Natalie grabbed her sidearm. "Tell me where he's headed." "Helipad. North sector. We've got maybe 4 minutes." Without waiting for permission, she bolted down the corridor. Wind ripped across the tarmac as Natalie burst onto the helipad access path. The rotors of a sleek, unmarked chopper were already spinning. Voss was halfway aboard, clutching a steel briefcase to his chest. "Commander Voss!" Natalie shouted. He turned and froze. For a split second, she saw panic flicker in his eyes. But then he raised a pistol. She fired first. The shot struck his shoulder. He dropped the briefcase. The pilot panicked, throttling up and lifting off without him. Voss collapsed to the ground, bleeding, muttering something she almost couldn't Here, they were going to use it. On all of us. Natalie retrieved the case. Trembling. Inside was a drive labeled Spectre V 2.9. Final build. Everything was spiraling out of control. Asterisk. The steel briefcase weighed heavier than any rifle Natalie had ever carried. Back in the underground command vault. She and Director Rausch stared at the decrypted contents of the drive labeled Spectre V 2.9. Final build. It wasn't just targeting algorithms. It was everything. Blueprints, command protocols, override sequences, and a chilling update log. Autonomous priority SHIFT. Engage all hostiles of interest, including friendlies if deviation detected. Natalie leaned back in her chair, jaw tight. They built a system that can kill, even commanders. Rausch nodded grimly. Keller's version of Spectre doesn't take orders. It evaluates threats and executes based on probabilities of loyalty. He's essentially created a weaponized judgment system. And Rekkonen wanted to stop it, she said slowly. Rausch looked away. We don't endorse Rekkonen's methods, but yes. His faction believes Spectre violates every principle of warfare. Autonomy without accountability is a ticking bomb. Natalie stood up, restless. We have enough here to shut Keller down. Why not release it to NATO Command? Because NATO Command might already be compromised, Rausch said. Keller's got allies in Brussels, Berlin, even Washington. Leak this wrong, and it disappears. Natalie knew what he meant. They couldn't go through channels. They had to go around them, and time was running out. A secure comm alert buzzed. Rausch picked up. He went pale. That was our Rome desk. Keller's en route to a classified NATO summit in Vicenza. He's scheduled to present Spectre as a defense tool to joint leadership. Natalie froze. If he gets support at that summit, she said slowly, the program becomes official policy. And there's no stopping it, Rausch said, unless you stop him. Natalie stared at the map. The clock showed 3:42. The summit was at 9 o'clock. 6 hours. One chance. By dawn, she was airborne in a reconnaissance craft disguised as a weather survey jet. Flying low over the Italian Alps, her gear was limited. One suppressed M82 rifle, a spotter scope, a comm relay, and no official authorization. She wasn't on a mission. She was on a countdown. At 8:56. The jet circled high over the Vicenza defense complex. Natalie lay prone in the cargo bay, hatch open, crosshairs steady on the courtyard below. A small procession of armored vehicles approached the main entrance. Her scope found Keller, dress uniform, steady gait, surrounded by advisors and bodyguards. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She breathed once, twice. The hair comb crackled. Natalie, it's Rausch. His voice was tight. We intercepted Keller's comms. Rekkonen's team planted a car bomb along his route. It's active. It will go off in less than 2 minutes. Her eye stayed glued to the scope. So he dies either way. Not just him, Rausch said. Spectre's files are in his briefcase. If he dies with them, the program becomes martyrdom. His allies will double down. We need him alive to testify. Her mind raced. She could take out the car. But she had one shot. Maybe 2. No time for doubt. She adjusted. Wind speed 12 knots. Elevation correction done. Natalie aimed past Keller, past the security line, to a rusted sedan parked across the street, tinted windows, no movement. She fired. The bullet hit the hood. A second later, boom. The explosion ripped through the street, but never reached Keller. Security dove, sirens blared. Chaos erupted, but the general lived. And so did the truth. Hours later, in a secured NATO facility, Keller sat cuffed at a steel table. Across from him was Natalie, No anger. No gloating dot, just finality. You used? Everyone, she said, even Reikanen. You tried to control fear like it was a weapon. Keller's voice was dry. Control is what wins wars. Natalie leaned forward. Not anymore. 6 months later, NATO officially decommissioned Spectre. Reikanen's name remained off every file. His location -unknown. Natalie declined. A promotion. She returned to the field, but not as a soldier. As a silent guardian. A failsafe against shadows too deep for paperwork. Because sometimes, the only thing that stops a war is someone willing to take the shot no one else will. The woman they rejected from sniper school saved a general, stopped a war, and rewrote what it meant to fight from the shadows. Her legacy wouldn't be medals or headlines. It would be knowing she aimed only when it mattered, and never missed.